So we are already into the 14th chapter of Romans, and of course, we're following the first reading at Mass, and so it skips around. So we are in the 14th chapter of Romans. Here is an interesting phrase or interesting teaching that St. Paul makes. And if we take it the wrong way, we can end up being lost in political correctness. Yes, indeed, this is really kind of interesting. I remember it really bothered me. I celebrated Mass sometime, and I have I don't remember I celebrated Mass sometime. I celebrate it regularly, but I don't remember what I said. But anyway, I said something from the in my homily, and I got a phone call after Mass, and someone called up and asked what I said, and I said this, that, and the other thing, and she said, "Oh, I might have misunderstood. I was afraid you offended Polish people," which apparently I hadn't, because she corrected herself. But at the same time, that really bothered me, because it's like, well, if I offended Polish people, then Polish people could call me instead of you. I didn't say that because she was already offended of something I didn't say in the first place. So that's that political correctness gone amok. But what St. Paul talks about today, really kind of an interesting phrase. He's teaching us not to do anything that may offend someone or may lead someone astray who has a weaker conscience than we do. See, that can really lead us down some really disturbing paths, so we have to be careful. So we have to understand what he's talking about. But what is he saying? Well, here's the thing. He's talking about this in the context of meat sacrificed to idols. If you have meat sacrificed to idols, St. Paul says it's irrelevant, because there are no idols and Jesus overcomes all things. But if you have someone who could easily be led astray by watching you eat meat sacrificed to idols and maybe feel, oh, it's okay to eat this kind of meat, then that's a problem. And he says, then for the sake of that other person, don't do that. And as you can see, that can lead you down some paths. But what he's talking about, and probably the next step would be to teach the person that is okay. But it reminds me of a situation that happened one time. This was back in the 70s. And back in the 70s, of course, things were a little bit different than they are today. As a matter of fact, if you look at some of the things that are going on today, back in the 70s, as much as people say, I just interrupt myself, but as much as people say, we can't imagine people ever lived like they did in the 70s, you see people online saying, you mean actually parents would just allow you to go off someplace and not come back until supper? And I said, yeah, actually, that was the rule. You'd come back at supper time. Come back when the lights turn on. I remember that. And I used to ride my bike. I rode my bike all over the place, all by myself. I had a big lock for it, and I used to carry the lock around me. I figured, well, if anyone attacks me or anything, I've got the lock, like that's going to do anything. But, it was a lock and chain, which I never had any problem with that. But I used to ride my bike everywhere. I loved riding my bike. And nowadays, people are, nowadays you have children who are playing in a park all by themselves, like a group of children playing by themselves, and they call the police on the parents saying, you can't allow that. Well, that's the way we were back in the 70s. I was 16 years old and I was thumbing on Cape Cod because I had a job on Cape Cod with a bunch of other people. We were caddies. I had a job on Cape Cod, and that's how we got to Hyannis. Well, I was in Osterville, which was the major town. Hyannis is a city, I guess. Major city or town, whatever Hyannis is. But Hyannis obviously is a major hub down the Cape. And that's how we'd get there. We'd thumb to on Cape Cod. So, a whole different world back then. Well, I was with some friends, and they chose to experience a little bit of what they called in the the opera Tommy, a little bit of Mother Nature? And I said no. I said I wouldn't. They did. I didn't. And someone else was in the car, and he didn't either. Maybe because I said no. You understand? So that's the principle that's there, is to, you have your principle of what you believe in and what you don't believe in. And St. Paul says, even though it's essentially what he's saying, even though it's not a sin to eat meat sacrificed to idols, if someone just happens to give it to you, be careful of the person who has a weaker conscience, who may, because he or she sees you eating this meat, may feel, oh, it's perfectly okay to get involved in sacrificing to idols or something like that. He doesn't go into the direction of exactly what he means there, but that's basically what we're talking about. Being understanding of what your principles are and not undermining someone else's principles, because people, well, so-and-so does that, and that must be okay because so-and-so does that. And that's what St. Paul is talking about. Being careful of leading someone astray because they aren't at the same level of understanding that you are. Do you see that? So it's kind of an interesting principle, and you can see it's at the basis, not maybe literally, but it clearly is at the basis of political correctness, when political correctness goes astray. But I can see a perfect example of where this falls in. One of the things I teach from the altar is that we as Catholics don't believe in freedom of speech. Anyway, what? That's a principle of the Constitution. Well, the Constitution is the Constitution. That's government. That's secular. And the church is the church. And although many of the principles in the Constitution actually come from natural law theory, we learned from Robert Riley, and great, absolutely, we could listen to him for years. But we actually don't believe in freedom of speech. Now, what do I mean by that? St. Paul talks about being careful, how you live and how you act and what you say. As a matter of fact, he says, only say the things that, I forget how he expresses it. I don't have it in front of me. Only say the things that are good for other people. In other words, don't, this whole idea, well, I have freedom of speech. I can say anything I want. You can in the government. You can't as a Catholic. You need to be careful what you say. Strangely enough, and this may fascinate people, it may even shock people. What? The principle of speech in Christianity is similar to the one in China. Do you know that? If anyone's in China listening, did you know that? For all the things you say against Christianity and everything else, the principle of free speech in Christianity and the principle of free speech in China, or the principle of speech in China, are very similar. It's all based on the idea, don't say anything that is destructive or uncharitable or anything else. Don't say anything like that is something you shouldn't say. And that's the principle. That's why when people say, I have free speech to say anything I want. No, you actually do legally. You can say anything you want. But should you say that? That's the question. And that's one of the principles St. Paul talks about. We have a right to do. There's a great line. I was talking about someone the other day. I think I mentioned it on here as well. A great line from H.P. Lovecraft, The Strange Case of Charles Dexter Ward. A great story. It's actually more or less a novella. And one of the lines in the story is, we have the freedom to do anything we want, but something should not be done. I don't know if I have the quote exactly right. And our free speech is the same thing. We have the freedom to say anything we want, but certain things should not be said. And that's the kind of principle that St. Paul is talking about. Saying things or doing things that only benefit other people in the long run. You may say something that needs to be said that may sound like it's mean, but it needed to be said. But you need to say things, but don't say things that you don't need to say that hurt people. You hear that? And that's one of the principles. And when you do that, you build yourself up falsely. I can say anything I want. And I can tell you, I should be careful what I say. Someone was wearing a T-shirt actually it was Marilyn Manson. It was a T-shirt. Now, I don't know if Marilyn and Manson approved this. I have no idea, but somehow it said Marilyn Manson on it. And it said, love to hate, hate to love, right? And I don't know anything about Marilyn. I know very little about Marilyn Manson. I know enough to know basically how to spell his name. I know what he looks like. I know he does some kind of rock and roll music. I don't know if I've ever listened to a song he does. So, but I'm also 67. He's not my generation. But someone was wearing this T-shirt. And again, I don't know if this was connected to Marilyn Manson, just happened to say Marilyn Manson, love to hate, hate to love. And I looked at that T-shirt. And there is someone you could call a very bad 7-letter word to his name, to his face. And if he turns around, why are you saying that to me? Well, look at what your T-shirt says. Your T-shirt says that I should talk to you like that. Well, that's a different story. Do you understand? This is who I want to be. But think of that too. Wearing that T-shirt, love to hate, hate to love. Well, okay. But on the same line, if you see someone who wears a T-shirt like that, who might be someone you know, or someone wears it to church, do you really think you should be wearing that T-shirt in church? Do you really think that, let's give you another better example, what I talked about yesterday. Something that absolutely sends me through the roof. When you're doing a funeral, you can pass this around to anyone in your family. By the way, when you come, put it in the obituary. By the way, when you come to my mother's funeral or my uncle's funeral or whoever's funeral it might be, don't be chewing gum. You'd be surprised how many people literally come to a funeral chewing gum, right? And you can turn around and say, you really going to be chewing gum walking into that church? Why? What's wrong? There are certain things that need to be said. It doesn't mean you should be silent in the face of things that should be said, but it does mean not to say things that people just don't need to hear at all, good or bad. They don't need to hear it. And that's part of that whole principle. Standing up, not going, don't go to certain places. You might be with a friend of yours, might be with several friends. Hey, let's go to that store over there. And, which stands for everything you don't say. You have yourself a ball. You want to go? That's fine. I'm not going. What? I'll wait for you out here. You want to go do that? Have yourself a ball. I'm going to wait out here. Why? Well, it's not really what I'm into. That's all there is to it. So you see that. And that's the principle that St. Paul is talking about. That whole thing of knowing your principles and knowing what you're going to do and what you're not going to do, because you're also, in all that you are doing, testifying on behalf of what you believe. Do you understand? And so that's what St. Paul is talking about. So you're testifying on what you believe. Now, that doesn't mean sometimes you may be stand up for something that people go, you believe that, or you would say that, or you would, yes, that's perfectly acceptable. They may think that we're all called, someone once asked me one time, a very great line, we're all called to be Pollyanna. No, we're all called, oh, that's okay. Oh, everything's okay. Yes, that's okay. No, we're called to stand up for what we believe in. And sometimes you may even want to go the extra mile. someone who is suffering on the street. Oh, great example of this. This was related to me by someone in the Catholic media industry, of a certain Catholic media channel, which I'm not going to mention its name, that would not allow any kind of video of any Catholics caring for people with AIDS. That's pretty bad. We'll talk on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Did you know that you can listen to Catholic Audio Media on the iHeartRadio app? Catholic Audio Media is now available through your iHeartRadio app. If you don't have the app, download it to your smartphone, tablet, or computer and subscribe through the podcast tab to Catholic Audio Media. You can also enable them through your smart speaker and hear them through the smart speaker as well. Just ask for Catholic Audio Media Podcast from iHeartRadio. You can hear them anywhere. You can listen to them as you're jogging. You can listen to them as you're preparing to go to bed. You can listen to them as you're eating and having breakfast or lunch or dinner. You can hear them anytime you want at iHeartRadio through the iHeartRadio app. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out. Patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. So, as the story goes, there was a person who produced video programming. This was back during the 80s, so this is long before we had video on the internet and all the other stuff. And that's what he did. He used to produce Catholic video programming. And in one of his programs, he showed, it was something to do with response to AIDS. And he would produce this for Catholic media. And one of the things he showed was Mother Teresa's sisters taking care of people with AIDS. And he submits the video, never gets a call back, and he never gets a call back again. You know that old "don't call us, we'll call you"? Well, that's real. I mean, you all know that's real. There's a story that another famous singer, top singer in the 70s, came to a point, he says no one would call him back because his peak had ended and he wasn't as popular anymore. And he'd call and people wouldn't call him back. That's all real. Don't call us, we'll call you. So what happens is he keeps calling to get a response. Nothing. And finally, he goes to the headquarters of this particular Catholic TV network, not Catholic TV, a television network that served Catholics, I'll put it that way. So it's not Catholic TV, obviously. And he went there and to meet with the head of the network, and the head wouldn't talk to him. Again, that whole principle. And finally, the head's assistant said, "Do you really think we want to have on our network Mother Teresa's sisters caring for people with AIDS," or something like that, or those kind of people? And he was shocked, right? Well, there you go. That's a complete reversal of St. Paul's principle. Yes, on your network, you should have that kind of thing because that's what the Lord would ask for. That's what the Lord would say. And so it's important for us to understand and to look at that all within context. You know, what is it that you believe in? And sometimes it's important to say, no, don't, this is what I believe in. This is what I teach. Well, I don't know if a good Catholic should do that. Show me where it says a good Catholic shouldn't do that. There you go. Take Dorothy Day. That's one of the major thing. Dorothy Day, who was so much all about believing and teaching and living the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. And there you go. I mean, I talked to a funeral director one time. I says, if you ever have a situation, well, I make that general rule. If you have a situation where someone is looking for a funeral and a church refuses to do it, a Catholic church refuses to do it, call me. Now, obviously, the funeral needs to be for a Catholic in a Catholic church. You do have that. Yeah. So that's what I say. Just call me. I mean, if the person's Catholic and you have someone's, well, no, we don't like that. Well, just call me. Because everyone is entitled to a funeral, but they might say, well, you shouldn't do a funeral for such and such a person. Well, first of all, who are you? Maybe you may not want to do a public funeral, but you can do a funeral. And that's the big difference. Now, why wouldn't you want to do a public funeral? Well, would you want to do a public funeral for Pablo Escobar? Of course, he's dead now, but you see my example. So, and that actually brings us back to the principle that St. Paul is talking about. You don't want to do something that leads people astray to believe it's perfectly okay. Something's perfectly okay. But let's be straightforward. The reason why funerals exist is to pray to the Lord to welcome a sinner into his kingdom. And if someone is a repentant sinner, then obviously that's welcome. If someone's unrepentant, that's a different story. But there are certain things that you want to be careful of, right? You want to be careful of. And so that sometimes means doing things when everyone else will say no. Well, we shouldn't do a funeral for that person. Everyone is entitled to a funeral. Sorry, that's the rule. They may not be entitled to a public funeral, but they are entitled to a funeral if they request one within the Catholic Church. That's true. So there are all different combinations. So everyone else might say, no, we're not doing that. Oh, yeah. Oh, well, we'll do that. There are all kinds of different combinations with that. Great example. That's another thing that pops up. Can you do a baptism for a child of a same-sex marriage? Yes. Believe it or not. So wait, what? What are you? The rule is the parents have to choose to bring the child up Catholic. That's all. They don't necessarily have to be practicing Catholics. Basically the rule is, well, if they're not practicing their faith, then you really don't have a reasonable expectation that they're going to bring the child up Catholic. But they may, in fact, want to bring the child up Catholic. So can you do that? Yes, you can. But the actual requirements are stricter for the godparents than they are for the parents. That's very much so. The parents have to, regardless of where they're coming from. And you can also say no at another situation. Could be, I had to say no to a couple being baptized, not being baptized, one of their child baptized. And I know this may not go over well. They had literally no interest in teaching the child the Catholic faith. And the only reason why they wanted to bring the child up, they wanted to have the child baptized, is to make a grandparent happy. Sorry, that's not the reason why we do it. Do you understand? We don't do it for that reason, to make someone else happy when you have no intention of, when you don't believe in any of this and you have no intention of teaching this. Do you understand? So there's all these different things and you want to think them through. Do you do this? Do you not do this? What do you do? And how do you bring this up? And what is your response in all of this? And this is how you look at it, but you want to do it within the context of what we truly believe. And sometimes it means to step out, to say, well, this is what we believe. Should we do this? Anyway, we've got this whole combination coming, and we go back to what St. Paul said. And he said, you want to be careful what you say, and want to be careful what you do in a way that it doesn't lead someone astray. So in this, it's only in the context of sacrifice to idols. Now, here's one of the most fascinating stories in the lives of the saints, is that of St. Francis of Assisi, who could not bring himself to hug a leper, which I suppose you might say, well, that's I bet you a lot of people like that. Well, he couldn't bring himself to hug a leper, but he knew if he really was going to be a disciple of Christ, he had to learn to hug a leper. And finally, that was one of the last obstacles he overcame in his life, was finally able to hug a leper. There was a great scene from the movie Papillon. This is back in the original with, I think it was Steve McQueen and Dustin Hoffman. And one of they were at a leper colony, and one of the guys, I think what it was, he was smoking, and he handed him his cigar. I think it was Steve McQueen. And he goes to, he smokes the cigar, and he says, "How'd you know I didn't have the contagious kind?" And he says, "I didn't." There you go. A very powerful scene. Not encouraging anyone to walk down that path, but you see what I'm saying. St. Francis came to a point where he said, no, if I'm going to be a disciple of Christ, I need to be able to welcome a leper, even hug a leper, because Christ would want me to do that. And that was one of his huge obstacles throughout his life. I absolutely will not. I can't. I try. I can't. And finally, he overcame that extra mile, So St. Paul is talking about us of, really understanding what our principles are and living them. We're going to be back right after this. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Life can be challenging, but amidst the trials and tribulations, there is wisdom to be found. Welcome to Sirach 2, a chapter filled with timeless guidance and insights from the book of Sirach. In this chapter, we learn the importance of remaining steadfast in our faith, even in the face of adversity. It teaches us to be patient, for trials can shape our character and lead to spiritual growth. Seeking wisdom and understanding is of utmost importance. Sirach 2 reminds us to study the teachings of the wise, be open to correction, and follow God's commandments. By doing so, we can find true fulfillment and blessings. Don't be discouraged by the temporary prosperity of the wicked or the challenges you may face. Trust in God's justice, for he rewards those who diligently seek him. Join us on this journey of faith as we discover the path to a meaningful and fulfilling life. Sirach 2 is your roadmap to wisdom, patience, and eternal blessings. Read Sirach 2 and let its timeless wisdom guide you through life's ups and downs. Available now in the book of Sirach, part of the Old Testament. Brought to you by the Voice of St. Anthony Parish in Alston. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out. Patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back. So, as you see, St. Paul is talking about all these things of really understanding what your principles are and living them as you are called to do so. Now, here is one of the fascinating little stories that came out. Many of you may have remembered Father Daniel Berrigan, S.J., he was in prison for his anti-war activities, and he was very much on the front line of a lot of the 60s radicalism. Nonviolent, but on the 60s radicalism. And you know, back during that time, the 60s and 70s, there was a big push among the leftist side, which still is, to be pro-abortion. Abortion was key. Everything was pro-abortion. And Daniel Berrigan, who was very much on the left politically, was very much against abortion. And that was a stand that he took that would surprise people, but that's where he stood. He stood very much against abortion. And that was that whole understanding. Again, sometimes we take positions that are against the tide, but they are in accordance of what we truly believe. And that's what St. Paul is calling us to do. We're going to talk more tomorrow, obviously, on the last day of the week. In the meantime, have yourself a blessed day, and we will see you then. The Catholic teaching in this podcast is reflected and presented as accurately as possible. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Archdiocese of Boston or any other institution.